Hey guys, today I want to talk about NAS. Today I want to talk about the DS413J, which is a network attached storage unit from Synology that I bought in 2012. So this is going to be a super long-term review. So what is a NAS, or network attached storage? Simply put, it is a device that you connect to your home network and it allows you to access data, store data, fetch data from the device. So I'm just going to jump into the reason why I have a NAS and why you might want to have a NAS for your own personal use. So I bought the NAS way back in 2012, so it's 8 years roughly. And what I used it for was to basically store photos. I had a lot of photographs that I would take on my camera, and instead of storing online, because that wasn't a thing back then, I would put it onto the NAS, the file server. So back in the day, or even still now, you can buy USB hard drives, plug it in, and then store the data onto the hard drive. It's a fairly simple method, and it worked for the most part, but there are some inherent flaws in it. So one of the flaws of USB drives is that they are limited in storage space, and if you fill it up, you pretty much have to buy another one. It's also hard to tell what is on which without cataloging it and storing that metadata somewhere. Another flaw of keeping your data on a USB drive is that if the drive fails, all your data is gone. And it's also hard to share data on this drive because you'll have to physically connect and disconnect the drive from each device that you want to copy the files from. So it's not the most convenient method. The reason why a NAS is really beneficial for me is I tend to buy the mid-range device. So for example, I bought this laptop. While it has decent specs, I opted for the middle of the line in storage. So it only has 256 gigabytes of storage on it, rather than 1 terabyte, which might be another $300. So to alleviate that problem, I usually access the files and store the files on my NAS rather than locally on the device. The NAS that I have has 4 hard drive bays that accepts 3.5-inch hard drives. It has an array of USB ports. It also connects to the network via an RJ45 1 gigabit Ethernet cable. So let's talk about the NAS, why I bought a pre-built one versus building it myself. The reason why I bought a pre-built one is that it's very simple. I don't have to do anything but just purchase the machine and the hard drives. The software is already pre-configured and already set up to go, so I don't have to mess around with setting up Linux and setting up an operating system and all that. It's just all ready to go. I want to talk about the positives of the DS413J and just working with it over time. The first is with the Synology NAS. They're very easy to use. It's simply plug and play, pop in the hard drives, and you're ready to go. There are a number of packages that you can install from a nifty little web interface, and you can get all sorts of functionality from it. There's a media server, a home surveillance server, there's obviously a file server, and Synology has done a great job with their web interface. It's extremely easy to use. It's almost like a desk operating system on there. So I'm actually really impressed by the web interface that they put in managing it. I also like the performance from this NAS. I haven't really had to think too much about it. It worked fairly well. From my network, I could download a file typically at a rate of 20 to 40 megabytes per second, depending on my network connection. If I'm on Wi-Fi, it tends to be dependent on how good my connection is, but I can expect between 20 to 40 megabytes per second. And if I am connected through an Ethernet cable, I can get higher speeds at 45 megabytes per second. One of the benefits of NAS device in general is that you can set them up in what's called RAID, redundant array of independent disks. Basically, in a nutshell, that means that you can stack up, let's say, 4 drives, and they share the data amongst those 4 drives, And if one of them fails, you're not going to lose all your data. In fact, you can just remove that drive, pop in a new one, and then it will try and replicate the data onto the new drive. That's one way you can set up RAID. Another way is you can just set them up in that all the data is stored amongst all the 4 drives. There's no redundancy, and it's generally the riskier method, because if you do lose a drive from failure, then you'll lose your data. So Synology built their own RAID system called the SHR, Synology Hybrid RAID, and it kind of gives the compromise between redundant storage and total available storage. And that has worked well for me in that even if a drive fails, I don't lose all my data. I can just replace the drive and it will replicate and fix things for me. And in the past, that has actually saved my butt, because I've lost 2 drives already due to hardware failure of the drives. And it was simply a matter of pulling out the dead drives, putting a new one, and it fixes itself. And another pro of having a NAS system is that because it's on the network, any device that is attached to the network can access any of the files on there that you allow. So you can set up different accounts for different users, but you can share files through the network storage, and that's been very helpful, working with the files across multiple different devices. And that has allowed me to buy mobile devices with typically less storage, because most of my files are offloaded onto the NAS. And one of the big benefits of this NAS system is I've owned it since 2012. It's 2020 right now, so 8 years. It's been running strong, and I haven't had a problem with the unit itself. So it's been running really reliably all that time. And another cool thing is when I connect to the drives, it sees it as one giant drive of about 10 terabytes of storage, which is awesome, because that would be equivalent to 10 1 terabyte drives or 3 terabyte drives. So I don't really have to juggle those drives around. It's all just one big massive space that I can use. But having the drive has been very useful. When I started doing this YouTube thing, I can put all of my raw footage on the NAS and even edit directly from the NAS. It has enough bandwidth to do so, and I'm not too worried about storage. So huge positive in the YouTube game. Let's talk about some of the iffy things, or the, I guess, minuses about the device. The unit I have doesn't support hot pluggable plug and play with the hard drives, so you have to turn off the device in order to add or remove hard drives. One of the potential drawbacks of using something like the Synology device is that if the actual physical hardware dies, you can potentially lose all your data from it if you don't have another unit that replaces it. So in theory, you can take the drives and put it into another Synology NAS, but if that is not available because the company goes out of business, then you might be screwed. Another downside is that the hardware is not really upgradable. Things from the memory to the CPU to the network card cannot generally be replaced easily, so you're stuck with whatever you have when you bought it. As a consequence, that means right now I'm connected with a 1 gigabit Ethernet connection, but if I want it to go to, let's say, 10 gigabits or whatever is in the future, I can't, because it's hardwired right into the box and there's no way to upgrade easily. And what might be a concern to some, but not really a concern to me, is that the CPU and the RAM is not upgradable. But for my use case as a simple file sharing network and running home surveillance from it, it hasn't been a problem. And another consideration is your transfer speeds will be limited by your network connections. So if you have multiple people trying to access files from your home on the device, then make sure you have a beefier connection. Keep that in mind if you have more than one person accessing big files from the network. And another potential con is, while the Synology does run Linux and is hackable to an extent, it's definitely not as configurable and hackable as something that you built yourself running your own custom Linux operating system from whatever distribution that you want. So that's the pros and cons of this specific NAS that I've used over the 8 years. It's, in a nutshell, it's dead simple, it's configurable, and it's just been chugging along for the past 8 years. And of course, the RAID functionality has saved my butt in the past. And if you are convinced to go out and get a NAS, I just wanted to go over a couple of things you might want to consider before you do that. Number one is make sure you connect through a wired connection when you're accessing the files. You'll get better speeds that way. While I can get pretty decent speeds over Wi-Fi, it all depends on your signal connection. So generally, a wired connection will be the fastest way to access your files. And also buy at least 2 drives to put into the NAS. It will allow you to take advantage of the fault tolerance and the redundancies, so you can do things like remove the dead drive and replace it and not lose your data. Also, make sure you are buying NAS specific drives. One of the reasons why I had drive failures is initially I put in desktop rated drives and they're not meant to run 24/7 and have constant access to them. They will fail over time due to heat or whatever. So get a NAS specific drive because they're rated and are designed to run in that environment. Also, while these devices do have a RAID built in and are fault tolerant to an extent, they're not the complete backup solution. Make sure you enable the cloud backup systems on there so you are continuously backing up your data offsite. So that way, if something happens, like your house catches on fire or the unit explodes, your files stored somewhere offsite. But what the RAID will do is just take care of the inconvenience of one drive failing. You can just pop in a new one and then you're good to go. To wrap it up, the device I have has been working pretty flawlessly for 8 years, and I would totally buy it again, maybe upgrade to one with more drives and just expand the storage even further. All right, thanks for watching. Bye. You can set them up in what's called RAID, which is redundant array. What does RAID stand for again?